I'm looking at it in a way that I am trusting God in this situation because I don't believe that God would put us in positions for us to fail. I don't believe that God would put us in a room without his protection. I definitely believe that God is in everything that we do, specifically when it comes to situations where he's asking you to do something uncomfortable. Welcome to She Self-Invested. I'm your host, Lodisha, and get ready to tune into your go-to podcast to feel empowered, to show up authentically feminine in male-dominated spaces, while prioritizing spiritual self-care. Let's invest into ourselves together, starting now. Hello, ladies. Welcome back to She Self-Invested. I'm your host, Lodisha, and I'm back with another empowering episode. Unmasking Imposter Syndrome, overcoming the lies we tell ourselves. Before we jump in, just a quick reminder to follow your favorite work bestie on Instagram at sheself_invested. Let's get into unmasking Imposter Syndrome. Imposter Syndrome. If I can be candid with you, I'm actually experiencing it as we speak, right? Like, imagine recording an episode about imposter syndrome when you've experienced it in multiple different ways. Like, that's the thing with imposter syndrome. First, it shows up in our personal lives. For example, if you are someone who grew up in a strict household where higher expectations were placed on you at all times, then naturally that can roll over into your professional life, especially if you have chosen a field in a predominantly male industry. So there will be incidents where you might hold yourself to a higher standard because you want to make sure that you're seen as an equal alongside men. Or maybe you grew up with a parent that was a perfectionist who expected you to just do everything right or get it right on the first time. That can show up in your work life as you being afraid to make a mistake, you having fear of failure. What if you're not representing the women in your field in the correct way? Like, personally for me, I experienced lack of representation working in the film industry. I mean, in my previous episode, I stated that I was the only woman of color in a sound shop, and how that experience set me up for success when it came to me working in the film industry. I still remember my first couple of weeks working on a film set as a Black woman in the sound department. There's this thing you have to do before you even get on the set, before you get to your department, before you start setting up. You have to get on a van, you have to check in. At the time, it was COVID. We had to do COVID tests, right? We had to go through all of these procedures before we can even get to work. I remember my first week, I kind of was a little confused in the process. So I was asking around and stuff. So when I would ask someone hey, where do I go to check in? And the first thing that asked me was oh, are you an extra? And I would say, no, I'm a sound utility. I work in the sound department. Oh, okay. I didn't know. Okay, so you check in over there. As I'm walking up to check in, the PA, she asked me, and she was like, "Oh, hey, are you checking in as background?" And I said, "No, I'm checking in as a sound utility that works in the sound department." She was like, "Oh, I'm so sorry." And then, I sign in and get my test and head to set. So what I didn't realize in those two interactions the same day was that I was already stereotyped. I was stereotyped before I even received my first paycheck. I was stereotyped. Because of the color of my skin, because of my sex, I was either background, hair, or makeup. Those were my options. That's what was basically told to me before I even made it on set, like I said. So I finally make it to the sound trailer, and I'm like talking to my sound mixer, my boom op. We're getting ready. I'm pushing the sound card, and once again, people are just looking. You would have thought, the way people were looking at me when they see me push the sound card, you would have thought that I was an alien who just got off a UFO, and like people just never seen, like, what is going on? Like everyone's just confused. I'm just as confused as them, because once again, at the time, I'm unaware of why they're staring at me. Throughout the day, we're setting up, and there's this thing where you have like downtime, while you wait for production to actually start. Throughout like the downtime I would have people randomly walking up to me, like being nice, of course, being very kind, like introducing themselves to me. But more curious is like, "So what do you do?" And I would tell them, "Oh, I work in sound." And it was like, "Oh." I would get two different reactions from two different races. From non-people of color, they would say like, "Oh, it's nice to see more women in sound." But when it came down to people of color, predominantly men of color, you know what they would say? "It's so nice to see a sister working in the sound department." And I'm like, "Excuse me? What does that mean?" So mind you, I'm unaware, I'm completely ignorant to the fact that this is a predominantly white male dominated position that I'm in. I was unaware of it, did not know. I finally asked the guy who made that comment about me, "It's nice to see a sister in the sound department." I asked him, I'm like, "What does that mean?" And he was like, "Well, yeah, I've been in this industry a long time, and you are the first Black woman that I've ever seen working in the sound department." When he said that, I'm like, "What?" Like now, I'm like, "What is going on? What do you mean I'm the only one?" So I didn't really have anything to say, but mind you, I kept that in mind. And then it started being like a domino effect, like more men, especially Black men, coming up to me telling me this. And it got to a point where I worked on an Oprah show, right? Where it kind of transitioned from me mainly just being the only Black person on set to me being around majority of Black people on set. When I tell you, that was such a rewarding feeling. And it wasn't even just the fact that I was around people that looked like me. It was the diversity. It wasn't just Black or white. That the color didn't matter. It was literally people coming together to create. To like, everyone had the same goal, was to get this show off the ground. Seeing that kind of community actually inspired me to stick around a little bit more in the film industry. The experience for me that took the cake was when I met this makeup artist from LA. She was a woman of color. She was, oh my gosh, she just had this queen energy about her. She was just so relaxed. She was humble. Like, I love this lady. She's amazing. And me and her would talk, and she finally just said the same thing. She was like, I've been in hair and makeup for over 20 years, and you are the first Black woman that I've met that worked in a sound department. When she said that, I felt the imposter syndrome creeping in. When I tell you, I felt so uncomfortable. I felt so uncomfortable because not only have I heard this from Black men, this is my first time hearing it from a woman of color. In that moment, I felt like I did not belong. Because how is it that both of you, right? I've heard this experience. I heard this from a man and a woman, both the same color as me, who have been in this industry for decades. And I'm only, a month or two in, and you telling me that this is the first time you've met a Black woman in this department? Like, I immediately felt like maybe I should not be doing this. Because how is it that these two different individuals been in this industry this long and they're just now meeting a Black woman in my role? Like, no. So I kind of brought it up to the guys at the sound shop, but not like thoroughly. I worded it in a certain way, and they were just like, oh, well, yeah, it's not really common for women to work in the sound department in general. It's basically, and I hate to say this because I love my sound guys, but I'm gonna say it. Everyone says it. It is basically known for being white, nerdier men who love sound, who love audio, period. I'm gonna say it. That's what it's known for. I did not know that. No one told me. And I think even if I did know, I wouldn't have cared. Like, I'm someone, if I'm interested in a specific skill, or if I want to learn something, I'm going to learn it. I don't care if I don't care about the color, who's dominating it. I don't care about the gender. I don't care. I just care about me fulfilling my desires of wanting to learn this task. Like, that's just how I am as a person. So even if I would have been told that, I still would have pursued working in the sound department. I just would have preferred to be prepared, but it's okay. With me experiencing that lack of representation, that caused me to question everything. Like, I wondered if this is something that God personally wanted me to experience. I went spiritual. I was like, are you asking me to be the representation in the sound department for other Black women? Like, are you, like, what is it? Because I'm like, I didn't like the feelings of not being there, right? I've never experienced imposter syndrome before until then. So I thought I was going crazy. Like, I remember talking to my brother about it because he experienced a similar thing when he took on a teaching role at his college. So I knew that, like, he would understand it a little bit more. And me and him discussed it, and he said, he was like, well, it's not that you feel like a fraud or that you don't belong, is that you don't see anyone doing what you're doing, so it feels like that. And when he said that, I'm like, you know what? That actually makes sense. That is why representation in male-dominated fields are so important, especially for women. And this is once again why I created this podcast. What I want for you, besties, is for y'all to enter these spaces knowing that you belong there. Now that I've shared my imposter syndrome experience with you ladies, let's talk about recognizing it. What are the symptoms of imposter syndrome? If you are experiencing persistent self-doubt and feelings of inadequacy, are attributing success to external factors rather than your own abilities, maybe it's fear of being exposed as a fraud, like me, like with my situation, just because I didn't see any representation, I felt like I didn't belong there. When in reality, God sent me as the representation. Like, that's what we have to be aware of when we're showing up in these spaces. We are being God sent. God has sent us there. God gave us the confidence to achieve this goal. I am big on God's approval, and this is important when it comes to imposter syndrome, because anytime your ego tries to tell you that you do not belong, you have to overwork to prove yourself, that compliment that your coworker gave you, it wasn't real, like you've just focused on criticism, or you might isolate yourself, and all that is the ego not wanting you to win. It's the ego wanting to control the outcome, besides allowing your spirit to lead, besides allowing God to lead. That's why it's important to receive God's approval over self. Finally, it is time to overcome the lies that we tell ourselves. How do we overcome imposter syndrome, right? First, we have to acknowledge our feelings. Recognize and name your feelings as lies. Like, you have to realize that you saying, "Oh, I'm a fraud, I don't deserve to be here," it's a lie. It's okay to say it, but acknowledge it. Acknowledge that feeling or that emotion as imposter syndrome. Next, seek support. Talk to mentors. Maybe you are one of the lucky ones that maybe you have a woman already in your position that you can speak to who might know what you're experiencing. Like, talk to her. And it doesn't even have to be a woman in your field. You can just talk to any woman in any occupation, specifically if it's male dominated, because even though we all don't go through the same exact thing in our field, we can experience similar feelings of imposter syndrome. Or if you don't have a mentor or a peer, seek out a therapist. Like, talk to your therapist about your experience. Like, I highly suggest that, because now you're getting someone who's going to see it from a different point of view. It might mirror something back to you completely different than what you might see about yourself. Reframe negative thoughts. I did a podcast episode about reframing the mind around people pleasing in season 1. I highly recommend for you guys to take a listen. But specifically when it comes to imposter syndrome, we have to challenge and reframe negative self-talk with positive affirmations. I spoke a lot about this in episode 1. I'm going to speak about it again. Positive affirmations is so important when it comes to knowing who you are, when it comes to defeating self-doubt. Like, the way you can reframe your negative self-talk is literally by countering that thought, that negative self-thought, with a positive affirmation. Like, let's give an example. For example, I am a fraud because I am the only woman of color in this department, right? That's an option. We have to remember that thought's an option. I can also have the thought, I am grateful that God allowed me to be confident enough to be in this position so that I can be a representation to others. Just like that. It's the same situation, but I'm looking at it from a different light. I'm looking at it from a positive aspect. I'm looking at it in a way that I am trusting God in this situation, because I don't believe that God would put us in positions for us to fail. I don't believe that God would put us in a room without his protection. I definitely believe that God is in everything that we do, specifically when it comes to situations where he's asking you to do something uncomfortable. God is right there. Next, celebrate achievements. Like, keep a record of your accomplishments and regularly review them. This can help you combat imposter syndrome in a more professional way, right? Like, for example, for me, I had the feeling of imposter syndrome, not just because I was the only Black woman, but because I didn't have film set experience. Like, I spoke about that once again in the previous episode. And that imposter syndrome kind of trickled down to me making a decision if I should take the sound utility role or not, right? Even though I had a film degree, even though I had training at a sound shop, I had mentors, I had people that helped me out, I still felt like I didn't deserve that opportunity, even though I had the accomplishments. We have to be careful about the high standards that we place on ourselves, and that was a perfect example for me. It's also important to practice self-compassion. Be kind to yourself and understand that everybody makes mistakes, okay? Everybody have setbacks. Let's say you are in your last semester of college and you've just been told that you have to take 2 more classes, which will unfortunately set you back in graduating this year. I know that can be a taxing feeling, especially if you put in so much energy, your time, maybe you're working 2 jobs, you're going to college, like maybe you really on your grind just to be told that you have to wait to graduate. That does not mean that you're a failure. That does not mean that you made a mistake. That just means that you're being prepared for what God actually have waiting for you on the other side. You never know who else you might need to meet, or maybe you might need an internship. That was my case. Like, you never know the extra steps you might need to do before you can enjoy the fruit of your labor, right? So often I feel we rush. We want to hurry up and have things quickly, like right now. But when we do that, we don't appreciate it. Which is why you have to give yourself self-compassion. You have to remember that you are exactly where you need to be and that you are enough. And lastly, embrace growth. By viewing challenges as opportunities for growth, rather than viewing it as a threat to your competence, this can really help you slay the dragons in your life, especially when it comes to feeling like you don't belong. In today's episode of She's Self-Invested, we tackled a topic that affects the best of us: unmasking imposter syndrome, overcoming lies we tell ourselves. I shared my journey from experiencing feelings of self-doubt in the film industry to overcoming negative thoughts with positive affirmations. We uncovered what imposter syndrome is and why it affects us and how it manifests in our professional lives. You can overcome imposter syndrome by 1, acknowledging your feelings, bringing light to the feeling of imposter syndrome. 2, seeking support, reaching out to women in your field, a peer or a therapist about your experience. 3, practice self-compassion, being kind to yourself and understanding that everyone makes mistakes and has setbacks can push you down a more promising path. 4, reframing negative self-talk. Challenge yourself to reframe negative self-talk with positive affirmations. And finally, trusting God to guide us through uncomfortable situations. Pray. If you're feeling uncomfortable or you feeling like this isn't where you should be, ask God. God will reveal to you whatever you ask. Asking you shall receive. That is one of my favorite verses in the Bible. Matthew chapter 7, verse 7. Ladies, by understanding and addressing the factors that contribute to imposter syndrome, we can build our confidence, embrace our achievements, and thrive in male-dominated careers. Thank you for joining me on this step of our journey together. I hope today's insights empowered you to face the lies that you tell yourself head on and to reframe your negative thoughts with positive affirmations, prayer, and patience. Don't forget to subscribe and tune in every Tuesday for more empowering discussions and practical advice. Please remember to follow me on Instagram for updates at sheself_invested. Let's continue to invest in ourselves and uplift each other. Until then, keep shining and showing up authentically. See you next week on She Self Invested.